Staten Island parents warned their children about a monster hiding near the old hospital. Then, real children started disappearing near the place where the monster was supposed to live. The monster had a name: Cropsey. Depending on who told the story, Cropsey was an escaped patient, a man with a hook, a killer in the woods, or something that waited in the tunnels beneath the abandoned buildings. Children heard it at camp. They heard it from older kids. Some heard it from adults who wanted them home before dark. Do not go near the old hospital. Do not go into the woods. Do not talk to strangers around Willowbrook. The warning sounded like folklore, a local boogeyman, the kind of story every place invents to keep children away from danger. But on Staten Island, the danger already had a location. Willowbrook State School had once held thousands of children and adults with intellectual disabilities. By the time the wider public saw what was inside, the name Willowbrook was no longer just a place. It was an accusation. Reports and investigations described overcrowding, neglect, and conditions so severe that the institution became a symbol of public failure. For families on Staten Island, the old grounds did not need a ghost story to feel haunted. The real history was enough. Then the buildings emptied. Windows broke. Brush grew over paths. People found ways into places children were told never to enter. A closed institution became a ruin, and the ruin became part of the warning. That is where Cropsey lived in the imagination. Not in a castle, not in a cemetery, in the leftover space beside a place where children had already been failed. In 1987, that warning changed shape. Jennifer Schweiger was 12 years old. She had Down syndrome. She disappeared on Staten Island, and the search for her moved toward the old Willowbrook grounds. The story, from that point on, stops feeling like folklore. Searchers walked through weeds, abandoned structures, and wooded paths. They were not chasing a campfire monster. They were looking for a missing child. More than a month after Jennifer vanished, her body was found in a shallow grave near the grounds. The place parents had warned their children about had produced a real grave. And suddenly, the old story had a face people could point to. His name was Andre Rand. Rand had worked at Willowbrook. After the institution closed, he was known to live around the abandoned grounds. He was a drifter in the exact landscape where the Cropsey legend had been placed. To a terrified community, that was almost too perfect. The monster from the warning story was supposed to live near the old hospital. Rand was found near the old hospital. The legend was supposed to steal children. Jennifer was gone. But real cases are not legends. They have evidence. They have gaps. They have courtrooms. They have facts that do not bend just because a community already knows what it is afraid of. Rand was convicted in connection with Jennifer Schweiger's kidnapping. He was not convicted of murdering her. That distinction matters, because the Cropsey story grows larger than the legal record. It pulls in other missing children. It pulls in memories, rumors, witness claims, fear, and the kind of certainty that often arrives before proof does. One of those children was Holly Ann Hughes, a 7-year-old girl who disappeared in 1981. Years after Jennifer's case, Rand was also convicted in Holly's kidnapping. Again, the conviction gave the public a legal answer to part of the story. But the larger question remained. How many disappearances belonged to Rand? How many belonged only to suspicion? And how much of Cropsey was a real man, compared with everything Staten Island needed that man to represent? That question did not stay in police files. It moved through neighborhoods. It moved through parents. It moved through children who grew up hearing the warning and then watched adults say the warning may have been real. That is one reason the documentary about Cropsey struck a nerve years later. The filmmakers were not outsiders arriving to exploit a strange local myth. They had grown up with the story too. They remembered Cropsey as children remember monsters, not as a timeline, not as a legal theory, but as a place you were not supposed to go. Then, as adults, they returned to the same story and found real names inside it. That is the trap in this case. The legend makes the facts easier to remember, but it also makes the facts easier to distort. Once a community believes it has found the boogeyman, every shadow near him starts to look connected. Every abandoned room becomes a possible hiding place. Every rumor feels like a clue that has not been officially admitted yet. And during the years when these cases were being discussed, America was already primed to see hidden evil everywhere. The country had lived through moral panics about strangers, cults, missing children, secret rituals, and violence hidden in ordinary suburbs. That atmosphere matters because it changes how fear behaves. Fear stops waiting for proof. It starts arranging the facts into the shape it already expects. This is where the case becomes more disturbing than a simple monster story. Because a monster story makes fear clean. It gives the darkness a name. It gives the woods a reason. It tells children that danger is outside the house, outside the road, outside the fence. But the real Cropsey story is not clean. It has a closed institution with a documented history of neglect. It has families searching for children. It has an abandoned public space that became a hiding place. It has a convicted kidnapper. It has other names orbiting the case without the same level of legal certainty. And it has a community trying to decide whether it discovered the monster from its legend or whether the legend made one suspect large enough to hold every fear. That question is why Cropsey survives. If this were only about Andre Rand, the story would have an ending. A man was arrested. A man was convicted. A man went to prison. But Cropsey does not end there because the legend was never only about one man. It was about the feeling that something had been waiting in the old grounds before the police ever arrived. It was about parents realizing that a story they used as a warning had been pointing toward a real danger. It was about children learning that adults sometimes call something a legend when they do not know how else to describe it. And it was about Willowbrook, a place where the ordinary promise of protection had already collapsed. That is the part most versions of the story try to rush past. The abandoned buildings are not scary because they look like horror sets. They are scary because they were public buildings. They had doors, staff, beds, rules, budgets, and official language. They were supposed to be part of a system that protected vulnerable people. When that system failed, the place kept its shape in local memory. So when children later disappeared near those grounds, the community did not have to invent dread from nothing. It was already there. Cropsey gave it a body. Andre Rand gave it a name. The courts gave part of it a conviction. But none of those things fully emptied the place of fear. There is another reason the story keeps spreading. It sits exactly between the believable and the unbelievable. If someone told you that a monster lived in tunnels under an abandoned hospital, you might dismiss it as folklore. If someone told you children disappeared near the same abandoned hospital and a man connected to the grounds was later convicted of kidnapping, the folklore suddenly becomes harder to laugh away. That does not make every rumor true. It makes the boundary unstable. And unstable stories are the ones people repeat. They repeat them because the story still has a job. For some people, Cropsey is proof that parents were right to warn their children. For others, Cropsey is proof that communities sometimes turn messy evidence into a cleaner myth. For the families, the myth can be cruel. It can swallow the individual child inside a legend. Jennifer becomes part of Cropsey. Holly becomes part of Cropsey. Other names become part of Cropsey. The story becomes famous, and the children risk becoming symbols inside it. That is why this case has to be told carefully. The legend is not the victim. The missing children are. The abandoned grounds are not the villain. The failures that made those grounds possible are. And Andre Rand is not a supernatural creature. He is a convicted kidnapper whose life intersected with a place already loaded with fear. The terrifying part is that the truth does not need the supernatural. It already has enough. A child warned not to go near the old hospital. A search moving into the weeds. A shallow grave near the ruins. A suspect who seemed to step out of the exact story children had been told. And a community left with an answer that still did not answer everything. That is the final shape of Cropsey. Not just a monster. Not just a man. Not just a rumor. Cropsey is what happens when a place fails children so completely that even the legend people invent about it sounds plausible. And that may be why the story never really ended. Because once a warning becomes real, nobody knows how to turn it back into a story.